This week in Quadriga, Europe's future, the return of nationalism. The European Union is reeling. In many member states, there's still no end to the financial crisis in sight, and the divisions within the Union are growing deeper and deeper. Poverty and unemployment have fed rising scepticism about European integration, and far-right parties are the big winners. In the poorest areas of Eastern Europe, the situation has grown critical. Minorities are facing more frequent and vicious attacks, and neo-fascist groups are finding it easier to muster new recruits. Nationalism is on the rise. Your host on today's show is Melinda Crane.
From Finland to Greece, far-right politicians and agitators are bashing not just immigrants and Muslims, but the European Union. And it looks like that's winning them support. So how strong is the appeal of the far right, and how big a threat is it to the established order? That's what we want to talk about today on Quadriga with three people who've been following developments on the far right for years. And they are Ulrike Guérot. She is Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, where she focuses on European integration, German-French ties, and Germany's role in Europe. And Katarzyna Stoklosa is with the University of Southern Denmark, where she is Associate Professor. Welcome. Rob Savelberg is a Berlin-based correspondent for the Dutch newspaper De Telegraaf. His expertise includes history and German studies. Ulrike Guérot, let's start out with a quick geographical survey. Where do you see the strongest threat from far-right movements or parties?
I think in recent time we have been observing Hungary as a very important example. Of course, there is a strong tendency in France now with Marine Le Pen, and we will need to see how this unfolds in the French elections forthcoming. And then the Netherlands are also an example of a country which has been formerly very liberal, very tolerant, and which now the coalition is completely deadlocked by the Wilders party.
Indeed, Rob Savelberg, if we look at polls coming out of your country, they seem to show a very dramatic rise in support for the right-wing Freedom Party. And its leader has been doing a lot of grandstanding lately. On the other hand, we've also just seen a rather dramatic desertion by a member of the party. So where exactly does the Freedom Party stand? How much support does it have at the moment?
In fact, right now they are talking about a lot of problems in the Netherlands. This man, Geert Wilders from the Freedom Party, he is in fact in charge of the Dutch government. I just looked back on YouTube, and he said just 2 years ago we should deport millions of Muslims out of Europe. He wants, for example, Eastern European immigrants that they should go away from Holland because they're making a mess, he says. And there's a kind of hotline established by him. And in fact, this man, he's totally in charge of the right-wing government. Right now, there are talks about, for example, diminishing the debt in the Netherlands. And he can say either the government will stay or fall, and his power is really, really big.
The government very much depends on the votes of the Freedom Party. Is that right?
It's a coalition between the Christian Democrats and the, let's say, liberal conservatives. And they depend on Wilders, but also on one party member from the party of Wilders that went away. And as well on the theocratic party SGP. This is like a kind of Bible party. So the former tolerant and very liberal Holland, they depend on a Bible party and on far right-wing populists.
Katarzyna Stoklosa, in your own country, in Poland, there had been a strong rise in far-right sentiment a couple of years ago, but it looks like some of that has tapered off. Is that right?
Well, that's right, but it isn't. So first of all, nationalism is very typical for Central Eastern Europe, Eastern European countries and Northern European countries like Finland. And what we can observe in the last 10 years is a growing nationalism in Eastern European countries, in Poland, Central Eastern, in the Ukraine, in Russia, but also Northern European countries like Finland. And of course, it has to do with the strong connection and with the border region between Finland and Russia. And concerning Poland, yes, the nationalism was very strong 5 years ago. It was because of the Polish right government, a very nationalistic one with the two brothers Kaczynski.
Yes, many of us remember the twins.
We remember, yes, the twins, and it changed with the new government and with the Prime Minister Donald Tusk, very liberal one. And we know that liberal government doesn't use the nationalistic card, because what's important for liberal government is the growing economy, is development of economic relations inside of Europe and with neighboring countries. But we have to see that there is nationalism in Poland and present too. And perhaps it's not a dangerous nationalism. Very funny story. This week, a new president of Germany visited Poland, Joachim Gauck. And he met with Polish President Komorowski. And Gauck used this Polish nationalist card. He told, I decided to visit Poland as the first country, because I love this country. I love this country of freedom. And, of course, he won, because all parties in Poland, right parties and left parties, told and wrote in the reports the best German president until now. So you see, these nationalistic feelings are present. Of course, they're not dangerous like the feelings of right parties, but there is nationalism in Poland.
Ulrike Guérot, how strong are the contacts between these different parties and movements? How much can we really talk about a pan-European far right?
Well, there's a joke, also a joke in the European Parliament, which is just the best movement organized on the European level is actually the European right-wing parliaments and parties. I mean, they're also neo-Nazis are actually pretty well organized across European borders. They meet systematically. They basically are most using the European achievement of Schengen, of cross-border contacts and so on and so forth. And they really made it to their advantage. You know, normally, I mean, what you see is if you have demonstrations of neo-Nazis in, say, the eastern part of Germany, Dresden. You have Swedish counterparts and fellow peers who join. So in a way, they are making a huge benefit of Europe.
In fact, Savelberg, we've just seen far-right groups from all over Europe meeting in Denmark to try to form a pan-European anti-Islamist alliance, very much hoping, of course, to feed off of disgust over the shootings in southern France by a young Muslim just a couple of weeks ago. What kind of success do you think they're going to be likely to have?
This is a kind of strange movement. You're talking about the English and the European Defense League. They're like, let's say, hooligans. You have them in the Netherlands, in England. They also come to Berlin. They have come to Germany to support the Dutch politician Geert Wilders that wanted to establish a right populist movement or party here in Berlin. It didn't really work out, I must say. And so, as Ulrike already said, they use the freedom to cross the borders. They don't want Polish or Bulgarian or Romanian people to cross the borders to come to Holland, for example, and take the jobs away. That's what they say from the Dutch people. And about Copenhagen, yeah, I think there is a strong sentiment of maintaining the real national thing about a nation to maintain the English of the Englishness, the Dutch of the Dutchness, the Danish thing from so with too much foreigners, they feel provoked by that, and they want a kind of self-justice. Maybe
vigilante justice.
Yeah, maybe in terms of even something what you've seen in Norway with Anders Breivik. The arguments are quite the same. But
in fact, the shootings by Anders Breivik, we all remember the terrible shootings of many, many young people. Didn't they actually set back the far-right movement, Katarzyna Stoklosa? Isn't that actually... aren't we actually looking at a radical racist fringe? Does it really have the kind of threat to disturb the entire European order?
Yes and not. Of course, they are very dangerous people, and we had Breivik and we had other similar examples in other countries. In many countries, something similar happened, but nothing was written, like, for example, in Russia or in Belarus. We have very similar cases. But we don't have to forget that these are similar persons.
But aren't they kind of lone wolves who are out there? You know, they are very extreme. They are arguably deranged. Are they really to be seen as part of a movement?
Yes. Yes, we have to see them as a part of the movement because they publish propaganda online and, of course, they influence a part of society. And on the one hand, of course, we can say these persons are sick and it's only one person, perhaps, in one country per year. But on the other hand, we have to see that they influence the society, big part of young people in many countries. So, yes, they are a part of this very dangerous right movement.
Ulrike Guérot,
I want to make one remark about that. I don't think it's only something which has to do with lone wolves, with just a individual who's doing these things. Because if you look around Europe, you will see everywhere these right-wing populist parties. So from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, even England, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary. So it's a totally European thing. And,
but interestingly enough, you mentioned Geert Wilders coming to Germany, for example, to try to expand his movement into Germany. Didn't have much success, Ulrike Guérot.
Didn't have much success, but let's focus a little bit on where it comes from, right? And I'm not so ready to buy into they are sick or so. I would love to discuss a little bit the sort of socio-economic origins of this. I mean, just one point. When we saw Le Pen, not Marine Le Pen, but his father, for the first time having real success in the French elections in '83, basically the Communist Party dropped from 13% by then, and Le Pen got 15. So there's this famous saying, les extrêmes se touchent. So you go from left sort of communist to populism. And why do you do so? Because you feel economically and socially neglected. So we are, to a large extent, we are talking about left behind people. If you look in former Eastern German parties, you know, or in the what is happening in the eastern parts of Germany, the sociological feature of people who are inclined to get sucked into right-wing populist parties is more or less male, dominantly male people who have not so much employment chances, who are not flexible, not mobile, less educated, and so on and so forth. So there is a sociological pattern, and of course, then I'm not excusing this, of course, but I think we need to discuss also the socio-economic conditions which have led to this rise of populist movement all across the European Union. It has something to do with rising inequalities of societies, and therefore they feel on the lower end of society, these people feel easier threatened by incoming people, by opening up markets, labor markets, because they feel like their cake gets smaller. And again, it's not for apologizing, it's more for understanding what socio-economic conditions also drive this policy process across the European Union.
I'm sorry, I not agree. It would be too easy because if we analyze the situation in different countries, different European countries, for example, Spain, we have economic crisis now, the biggest one, almost the biggest one in Europe after Greece. And the situation isn't like in eastern part of Germany or in Finland. It wouldn't be possible now to have such nationalistic feelings in Spain. Although we have this situation.
Catalan, let's see.
And eastern part of Germany. I have experience, research experience and living experience in eastern part of Germany and western part of Germany. We have in western Germany worse economic situation in many regions than in eastern Germany, Schleswig-Holstein, worse than in Saxon. And the people are different. As you mentioned, very dangerous situation, very dangerous development in eastern Germany. And your analysis is because we have this bad social and economic situation. But why doesn't it happen in Western Germany?
Among other factors. I didn't say that this is monocausal. This is among other factors. But one other factor for Eastern Germany, at least, is that these people were literally closed into a wall for 40 years. They never saw strangers. So, of course, that's something that then comes in is a different sort of cognitive experience that the world is broad and you can get people in. I think it's not monocausal, but to deny that socio-economic factors also matter for the rise of populism in Europe, that I underscore.
I want to come back in just a moment to the socio-economic side, but perhaps briefly staying with the question of Germany and how fertile the ground is here for the far right. Rob Savelberg, you have, of course, been following Geert Wilders as he tries to get support also here in Germany and not only in your native country in Holland. How successful do you think he has been and is likely to be in finding support here?
In Germany? What kind of support he should get?
No, how much support has he found so far? Because, of course, he came here and spoke in Berlin, didn't he?
He spoke twice here in Berlin. There were about 300 camera teams there, so the total international media was present. But in fact, at the elections of the city of Berlin, 1 or 2%, which is not enough to get into the city parliament. And so it has been a mistake. It has not succeeded. But if you know that for these kind of ideas in Germany as well as in other countries, you have like 10 to 20% possibility for voters to vote these kind of right-wing populists, even in Germany. It is just very difficult in Germany with the election system, the 5%. You have to have these 5% before you get into the parliament, and also you have to be on the ground on the local sides in every of the 16 Bundesländer on the
states, the federal states,
the federal states here. You have to be present, and to build it up, it takes years and years and years. And the only party for the really far right ideas here is the neo-Nazi party NPD. And I talked last week with one of these members in parliament in Mecklenburg, in one of the states of Germany. And one of these neo-Nazis, he told me, because we are in, there's no place for other parties in between. And there are also scientists that say, politicians, They say because the neo-Nazis are in charge of the province on the countryside in eastern Germany, there's no way for right-wing populists in Germany or in eastern Germany as well to come into parliament because there's no space right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We mentioned several times the degree to which societies that are just opening up, particularly in Eastern Europe, may present particularly fertile ground for far-right movements. I'd like to take a look at Hungary, which, of course, is being referred to by some people these days as Orbanistan.
The ruling right-wing party Fidesz under President Viktor Orban won Hungary's last election with well over half of the popular vote. Since then, it has revised the country's constitution, strengthened its own powers and limited democratic freedoms. The ultra-nationalist Jobbik party, the third largest in the country, is gaining ground. Struggling with a stagnating economy and a large budget deficit, Hungary's nationalist stance is causing more and more concern in the European Union. EU leaders and parliamentarians are openly questioning the country's commitment to democracy. Thousands have hit the streets in protest, but in Hungary, radical nationalist sentiments are competing with the democratic values that are at the heart of the EU.
Katarzyna, Stoklosa, the support for the far right within Poland may have receded somewhat, but certainly there's been a lot of enthusiasm among some Poles for what's happening in Hungary.
Not really. If there was some, it was inside of nationalistic parties. But in the population, in the media, and in research analysis, the development in Hungary was criticized a lot. And this is a very dangerous movement and a very typical one in Hungary. Very typical for Central Eastern Europe, but it's still worse than in other Central European countries. Why? Because we have a lot of different minorities in Hungary. A Slovak one, but it's a German one. We have Eastern minorities and Western minorities living in Hungary. And of course, nationalistic politicians like Jobbik use these minorities for their nationalistic politics, and they play this card, and in their speeches they're against the minorities. It's something typical for Hungary. We don't have the situation in Poland because there are almost no minorities, national minorities in Poland. So my thesis is that this nationalistic movement is stronger and worse in countries with many different national and religious minorities.
And now let's add the economic component, Ulrike Guérot. To what extent is Orbán's success and the support for the right in Hungary a product there of economic distress?
I think if you remember the financial crisis, and you price in that many immediate people bought their houses and then had to, when the Hungarian money sucked, had to do their mortgages in either euro or Swiss franc. I think you really had an impoverishment of middle classes. I think that was around 2008 or 2009, and that definitely prepared also the worsening of socioeconomic conditions in Hungary. Not saying again that this is monocausal. I'm not talking monocausality here. I think there's causes, and many have been mentioned. Ethnic minorities are certainly also a fact. The other thing is how you basically, once you're in a movement of this, how you create a dynamic. And Russia was already mentioned, because the moment you then get sort of a hold of the press, which is that feature of Hungary, where with the media rights and the changes of media reporting, you get hold of the press.
Orbán rolled back the laws that had...
they rolled back under enormous pressure of the European Union. But still, I mean, there's always this tipping point momentums where these movements basically then can also have the press in their favor. It's a little bit also like Berlusconi, I mean, to mention this. I mean, he's also left, but I wouldn't put yet Berlusconi into the same basket than sort of a populist movement, but it was sort of close to it, yeah? And he also got press and media in his hands. So I think there is this dynamic that we can see. We can see it for the Independent Party in the UK, and again, the Independent Party is not a classical populist, let alone right-wing party, but these are the populist movement where then the moment you get media, you get policy support, and then you have tipping points, and you have branches and segments of the society who basically turn sour.
Rob Savelberg, how strong is the threat to democracy in Hungary, do you think? Has it been over-exaggerated, or is it a very real danger?
It is a very real danger. It is really, really, really dangerous. I know Hungary quite good. I work also as a correspondent there. I've seen already in 2007 speeches from Orbán over there, where he invited the people from Jobbik, from the extremely right-wing, anti-Semitic, anti-EU people to his to his speeches. He didn't have any problem with them having these Arpad flags, which they used in Second World War. So the Hungarian, let's say, collaboratists with the Nazi regime. I think he's an extremely nationalist politician. And he knew very good what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall. He was an anti-communist student leader. He's still anti-communist, but right now I think that he's totally in control of the press from the radio and television. He will not withdraw that. So the media is under control, and so also the kind of true of that what the people what they see on television, what they hear on the radio is for example controlled by a guy. He's called Daniel Papp. 32 years old. He was a former member of the Jobbik party, so from an extremely right-wing party and an anti-Semitic party. And this man was put there on this position by the party of Fidesz, of Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So it's inside Europe, inside Hungary. It was Hungary that took the first stone out of the wall or the Iron Curtain in 1989. And that's a very crazy and a very dangerous situation.
And you think now they're putting the stone back in. But Katarzyna Stoklosa, if we look at your own country, can't we be pretty confident that parties that rise by democratic means can also fall by the same means? After all, the Law and Justice Party in your country was voted out of power, and now we have a centrist government in power.
You are completely right, and this is what I wanted to mention and to show why the situation in Hungary is a very special one in Central Eastern Europe. It has to do with the economic situation after the transformation process, after 1989, and now for the society in Hungary, the situation became better after 1989, and the economic development was very good, and people got more money than before, and they started to live better, to have better conditions. And now, some years ago, the situation changed after the economic crisis. It didn't happen in Poland, because in Poland the situation after the economic situation, after the transformation process, was all the time the same. Yes, nothing changed for the people, and there's a middle class, but not really strong, and the situation didn't change for poor people. They didn't get more money after 1989. So, and we can see that these changes can influence these nationalistic feelings, because if people start to live better, and after that again the situation starts to get worse, the people start to protest. If we have all the time the same stable, bad but stable situation, the process are not so strong. This is my analysis.
So, in a word, Ulrike Guérot, can we trust to democratic means that a government like Orban's is likely to be voted out of power, or do you think that that the distortion is truly so great that perhaps that is no longer the case?
I think we can trust democratic means. We can also trust probably pressure from the European Union. After all, Hungary is a member of the European Union, and the European Union has still a couple of legal leverages towards Hungary, which we were reflecting. You remember when Haidar was elected in Austria, there were a couple of sanctions and then a couple of measures that you could still engage. So probably also cutting cohesion funds or stuff like this. We didn't go that far for the moment. So there's a couple of leverage still to go for.
But again, given the current frustration and resentment of the European Union in many places, does pressure from the European Union modify the populism or make it worse?
I think that if you look at Italy, for instance, also under Berlusconi, there were many Italians hoping that the European Union would finally also basically not sanction, but they feel happy to be part of the European Union because they trust in the European Union, that the European Union regulates the nasty stuff of their own country. And I'm sure there are still people in Hungary who are really desperately looking for support from the sort of the liberal wing of the Hungarian intelligentsia, who is looking for the European Union to help them out and to make it happen that Hungary basically does not lose track. So I believe in democratic mechanisms here. But again, what I'm saying is the problem is when you reach a certain tipping point. And the tipping point is when it's a little bit like Putin and the Nacha movement. And if you have so much capacity to mobilize mass, to mobilize the youth, to determine what has happened with your hooligans and to determine the media because they are no longer free, then you have a tipping point and then it starts to be tricky and difficult.
The question is whether the euro crisis itself has become a tipping point and changed the equation for the far right. Because if we look at the rhetoric that we're hearing from far right politicians and from agitators, it is very much now also an anti-EU rhetoric.
Europeans have never felt close to the Union's politicians. The bureaucratic world of transnational governance is simply too far from daily life for most of the bloc's citizens. Only a few of the most powerful political figures in the EU government are well known, and the lack of transparency hasn't helped build trust over the years. Not a major problem, at least until the onset of a major financial crisis in countries like Greece that have been hit hard by strict austerity measures, cutbacks and high unemployment. Brussels is taking the blame for the misery. Nationalist politicians and movements are using the EU as a scapegoat, with success.
Rob Savelberg, that's certainly true in your country. Geert Wilders has called for a referendum on whether Holland should even stay within the Eurozone. He's also called for reinstating the old currency, the guilder. Is that kind of rhetoric attracting more support than his old anti-immigrant line was capable of doing?
I think it's once again a combination of both. So all explanations are always these not monocausal things, but it's a combination of factors.
But is there a critical mass here now that we've got the euro crisis?
I think definitely that the euro crisis, not only in Holland but also in other countries, is mobilizing more populism. For example, in Hungary, Hungary is broke since 2008. Then they got money from IMF and from the European Union. Now they're broke once again. More or less. So, and you see the dramatical situation in Greece, in Hungary, but also right now in Holland. Geert Wilders have seen that the Islamic card, the anti-immigration card, the argument he uses, is no longer the biggest point. The biggest point right now is getting out of the euro, stopping giving all these billions to helping and saving funds for the southern parts of Europe, for Greece, Portugal, Spain, etc. So right now he says, stop with this euro. Stop with giving all our money to these countries. And even here in Germany, if you just watch out the liberal and conservative parties in the Bundestag, in the parliament, for the saving umbrella of the ESM, the support is no longer totally available. We will see that maybe in a couple of weeks or months, that even Germany will have its problems with giving the money of the people from the taxes to those countries.
Katarzyna, Stoklosa, how much has support for the European Union died off or even been replaced by resentment in Eastern Europe? Because, of course, there was a great deal of support for the EU early on.
There was a great deal for support, and when we compare the situation now and the situation 2004, after enlargement, the next enlargement of the European Union, I'm very critical, and the situation is worse, and we don't see so much support anymore. there are differences. There are differences between different countries of Central, Eastern Europe, and in Poland this support is still stable. If we compare the situation with 2000, 2004, and now, and situation after Schengen, introduction of Schengen in Poland, is a stable situation. And the majority of Polish politicians and population, they wish euro and would like to have euro and prepare the situation, the economic situation in Poland for the introduction of euro. But when we observe Hungary, when we observe Czech Republic, Slovakia, support isn't so strong, so big as 2004. So I'm critical.
Certainly, EU bashing is one of the things that Marine Le Pen is riding in France. She's sounding awfully confident these days, Ulrike Guérot.
Yes, but let me just make a footnote to what has been said. First, opinion polls in Germany show that 57% of people in Germany are back to trust in the European Union. So the polls go up. And the last decision in the Bundestag just yesterday has shown that all party support, including the Liberals, for ESM, the Fiscal Compact and EFSF is now assured. I think there's really a policy change in Germany, and the policy change is that we stick to Europe and the euro, and we will make everything to make it happen. And I think this is tangible. And this is also explaining why in Germany populism didn't sell and Europopulism didn't sell. See Schäffler, see the Liberals who tried it out and who failed. So I think there's also this good news.
But interestingly enough, before we get to France then, since you mentioned it, interestingly enough, there's a lot of resentment against Germany in many other parts of Europe.
Yes, and that is the real problem. And there is the problem, we cannot discuss this here because that's not the theme. Are we having the right recipes for the crisis? Is austerity the whole thing? Is it the exclusive thing we should do? Shouldn't there be a growth component? That's the discussion to come. It will come with François Hollande. Should he win? Do we need to complement the austerity path with something else? And it again explains that the austerity policy through which we have been shuffling all our citizens for the past 2 or 3 years is also at the origins of this populism. I mean, you can go back to the Weimar Republic, and there was this famous historical saying, is if the left doesn't hold its argument and if the left doesn't defend the workers' rights, then you get populism. That's basically what happened in the Weimar Republic. I do not want to overstretch the analogy, but a little bit sort of austerity only is what also is at the origins of populism. And the moment we go back to politics of growth and to politics of complementarity, I think this will probably do the trick, or hopefully do the trick. Marine Le Pen, let's see. It's a little bit tricky to do forecasting of the French elections. She has a pretty interesting anti-Euro stance. I'm not so sure whether the French will buy into it, because in France it's a little bit similar. This country is not really well, and they feel they will need to go to structural adaptations. But do they want to leave the euro, as Marine Le Pen just says? And is this country going for the easy solutions? The populist solutions is the easy solutions. Money for everybody, let's leave the euro and then the world is fine. But this neglects that we are just having a global situation in which we need policies to address also the global requirements. And I think French people are also aware that Marine Le Pen offers quite simple solutions. So let's see what she gets in the first round. I'm not so scared that there will be a dramatic effect in France for her.
One thing Marine Le Pen does seem to have achieved, though, is to force or persuade Nicolas Sarkozy to move further to the right. And as I looked at the situation both in France and in your country, in Holland, Rob Savelberg, I asked myself whether that isn't perhaps one of the greatest threats, that the populism of the far right makes mainstream politicians shift further to the right as well. Are we seeing that happen in your country and possibly in France as well?
Absolutely. I want to give one example. For example, Geert Wilders, he has called a kind of hotline for complaints against Polish people or from Bulgaria or from Romania. And it was kind of successful in this way that a lot of people went to this hotline and to this website. Geert Wilders also in the opinion polls, he went bigger. And the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, which is controlled by Geert Wilders' party, is not wanting at all to say any word about this hotline, which is called very discriminative. In European Parliament, it is said that this is discriminative. In Holland, in Poland, a lot of ministers and the people are really very angry about it. So that the Dutch Prime Minister, a liberal Prime Minister, doesn't want to say a thing about the website hotline, which is really excluding people that work in Holland, putting the people against each other, Polish people against Dutch people, where they're both living together and working together. You see that also the right-wing parties in charge in Holland, but maybe also in France, that they're moving more and more to the right in order to not leave the field to these right-wing populists.
Katarzyna Stoklosa, we heard Nicolas Sarkozy whipping up two conflicts with Brussels, saying that France needed to rethink its agreement to Schengen, once considered an absolute pillar of the Eurozone.
Oh, yes, it would be terrible for the Eurozone, and of course it will be not possible, and so we are lucky politically to change the Schengen agreement, but the fact that such discussions take place at the European thing in European countries, this is a pity for the development of European Union and for the cooperation between different European countries.
Ulrike Guérot, could it make it more difficult to solve the Eurozone crisis? I'm thinking, for instance, again, of the Netherlands, where the Prime Minister is under a great deal of pressure to take a hard line on expanding the European Stability Mechanism, for instance.
Well, I think this is now basically the policy choice that has been taken. We have been doing stability. It's good. It's necessary. We have been doing austerity. We have been imposing structural reforms to most of the countries. Most of the countries, by the way, delivered. Look at Italy, very successfully. Look at Ireland, which is improving. Look at Spain. So I think now the next step is to come. And the next step, and if you look at the last Council conclusions, it's about growth. It's about complementary policies.
Are you concerned that a shift to the right by Sarkozy, if he remains in office, by Mark Rutte, that this could make it harder to solve?
He will not shift to the right. I mean, the Villepin speech of Sarkozy, where he was anti-Schengen, anti-something, it was an electoral speech. It was visible for everybody that Sarkozy, for once, needed to fish in the bassin of Marine Le Pen to get a little bit of these voters. You know, the moment he's sort of elected president, should he be elected, I think he's back to reality, and then reality will work. And I think the same is true for Mark Rutte. I think the Netherlands have a pretty good policy line with the Germans and are following the German line. And the line is basically, we did what we needed to do. That has been harsh, but now we will also complement. And so I think reality will win. And I'm not giving too much chance to Marine Le Pen.
Okay, so no alarmism there from Ulrike Guérot. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today. And thanks to you out there for tuning in.